So again, we have these three topics that we will cover in the microbiome: obesity, precision nutrition for the gut microbiome, skin aging and beauty for the skin microbiome, and then pregnancy and femtech for vaginal microbiome. Now, there's a lot of overlap. You will find, for example, that in the femtech world, women are treating different, microbiome related conditions with pre and probiotics that are taken orally, so they are gut microbiome based. And you will also find that some gut microbiome changes can affect things like balding and dandruff, and that's also skin related, but also gut related. So really, this microbiome related space, there's a lot of overlap between these different areas. But in each one of these areas, there are also specific things to consider as we think about, what is needed, who is it needed for, and what is innovative and different about it. Obesity and precision nutrition is, I think, the most kind of widely known topic, where we have one primary challenge. And again, you will hear from experts on this as well, but I just want to give you kind of a preview of what that will cover. So one important consideration here is that anyone can diet, right? I mean, if you stop eating and I stop eating, we're going to lose a lot of weight right away. The problem isn't that. The problem is sustaining that weight loss over time and addressing specific challenges to different individuals at different ages and conditions of their body that will really help them to lose weight in the long term and feel good about it at the same time. So that will be something that we will talk about in that session. As I mentioned, skin aging and beauty is a huge industry. Traditionally, of course, more women are focused on that, but today even men are aware of their looks and kind of how their skin and comfort of their skin is related. And that's why you see, silver line clothing. And that's why you see all kinds of, questions about whether this kind of lotion or that kind of lotion is appropriate for what type of skin. So I think a really interesting topic with existing products on the market already that are claiming, that this works and how it works exactly. So I think a very interesting topic there as well. Finally, pregnancy and femtech. All of us, men, women, we all have a link to, pregnancy and to, childbirth. So I think fertility, is a big business, but also there's a lot of other kind of things that we might not necessarily, hear about or understand. And I think that we recently spoke to an expert who is actually working on a company in that field, and she was telling us about how, women a lot of times don't know how the microbiome factors in to these decisions that they have to make. And, a lot of clinicians don't know. And really, healthcare is starting to become a lot more focused on prevention rather than treatment. And I think this is a huge opportunity because the microbiome, just by its property, is something that can establish a certain condition in its environment. And I think that, this is a very specific kind of a challenge where those kinds of preventive and long-term benefits are extremely important for the outcomes. All right, so let's briefly kind of talk about the major focus of today. And the major focus of today is, what are the specific skills that you have to know, or what are these data science, computer science, and engineering type solutions that we think are most promising in this field? So, as you know, one of the major kind of ways that we can study the microbiome is through sequencing. And the reason for that is because culturing bacteria, right? We could culture bacteria, but unfortunately, only like 1% of all bacteria could be cultured in the lab. And when it is cultured in the lab, it is now in isolation. And because it's in isolation, we don't understand how those microbes actually interact with the other microbes in the microbiome, because microbiome is like a community that works together. And so sequencing allows us to actually understand what kinds of bacteria we have, and potentially what kinds of enzymatic or active compounds they produce. And that's a very important kind of a technology that really, for the first time ever, allows us to see what is happening in the real time. And so, what's important to understand? Well, what's important to understand for some of these techniques is that they work in different ways. They have different methods of sample preparation, and we'll talk about that as well, because really, how do you sample skin microbiome? For example, we can have an oily skin, and then you can have a swipe and understand what's in the swipe. But what if you have dandruff? I mean, how do you understand the microbial community of a dry skin, right? So there are ways to do this. There are techniques to do this. We'll talk about that during the hackathon preparation as well. And when you sequence, now the challenge becomes, well, a lot of this data that is prepared in a certain way, after it is sequenced, it has very specific properties. And the property really is that you have different approaches to process that data, preparing it for analysis. And the preparation of the data for analysis is critical for your analysis to be accurate and for it to be clear. And beyond that, as I mentioned, we have different methods of data generation that perhaps result in a challenge of multi-omics integration, because we're talking about, the microbiome and maybe the metabolome, or maybe even the host gene expression, right? So there's a lot to think about as we approach this kind of data. Now, there are some standard tools in the field, and it's important to understand what these tools are. I mean, a very kind of popular package of tools called KIME or CHIME is a collection of tools designed for 16S ribosomal RNA. And there are other things that we should think about, because really just beyond these standard tools that we have to understand, because they address very specific noise issues and very specific reproducibility and accuracy issues, we also need to think about, well, what other methods are out there? For example, there's 16S ribosomal RNA, hypervariable region amplicon. There's also just the full 16S ribosomal RNA amplicon. There's full metagenomics, where we try to assemble individual genomes. There's transcriptomics, where we try to understand what are the genes that are being produced by these bacteria, by these organisms. There's metabolomics, which looks at active compounds. They're not proteins, but they're metabolites, so smaller kind of active compounds that are being generated and produced. And there are methods to do that, like LCMS and MSMS. There's gene expression studies. Again, how does our body, the host, respond to the changes in the microbiome? For example, if we talk about inflammation, a major topic in the leaky gut, or maybe even skin rashes, right? How do we connect the changes in the microbiome, or the expression changes, not the composition changes, but expression changes, to how our body reacts? And even genomics, what kind of genomic or genetic properties kind of tend to fall in a specific type of a microbiome. In addition to that, there are three additional things that I think are very important from a computer science kind of perspective. One of them is machine learning. So why machine learning? Well, the reason why machine learning is such a big deal is because these data sets, as they grow, and when they grow, that means we have better representation of different individual types. We also need more complex and kind of sensitive methods to find and extract patterns. An important part here is also visualization, right? And visualization, I think, is not just having a plot. Today, visualization is much more connected to the data because it is interactive And it allows us to quickly search and find patterns that we know how to interpret. So a lot of it is about connecting different sources of data together. And then finally, cloud computing. So why cloud computing? Well, one of the main reasons cloud computing is such a big deal in this case is because once you produce something, you would like it to be usable by many different individuals on demand without having to put upfront investment into hardware that is necessary for these kinds of applications to operate. So environments on the cloud, a lot of which are provided free of cost initially, are going to be very useful for prototyping and designing something that works today on a small population and then eventually can be used by larger and larger users without that upfront investment. But of course, the cloud technology is nothing more than simply having that accessible hardware elsewhere. And so understanding the process of accessing different compute resources, different database type resources, and even different kinds of data storage resources are going to be very important to be able to produce something that is actually valuable. A good example of that is an understanding of how recommendation systems are working today and what kind of innovation could be added to them when we think about the information that the microbiome can provide for things like activity tracking, precision nutrition, and things like that. And a good example here is this. This is an example from another hackathon that a team of students actually made, where they made a food recommendation system that relies on machine learning that asks questions about your preferences, your diet choices, and things like that, and recommends similar foods through this recommendation system. So what you will see is that a lot of the approaches are to find a similar, comparable or alternative, right? So for example, let's think about users that, let's say, have different kinds of microbial communities in their gut. Well, in an ideal world for a machine learning recommendation system, what you can say is, once I identify a group of similar individuals, I can say, well, this is what I know about this group, and this person is new. How could I recommend to them something that works for the rest? But if you think about the microbiome, that becomes kind of challenging, because even describing what groups are, identifying how to match those groups, and then understanding what do those groups actually mean are all areas where innovation is critically needed. So here's a brief example of how this recommendation system actually works. You can see that you kind of type in. So again, you can start thinking about how this idea could be further developed into something that incorporates the microbiome and kind of helps us think about a user using something like this, again, maybe once or maybe continuously, using it to actually get some ideas about, what they might find useful. So again, I am not necessarily the expert in all of these things, but I do want to share how a lot of these things are ideas that I think everyone will learn from by listening to experts in the field. And I am pleased to know that there's a whole panel of experts that are going to be presenting from technology backgrounds like sequencing, from industry innovation perspective, like even investors that have invested in this field and can tell you what has worked, what hasn't worked, and why. Experts in computer science and machine learning that have built such recommendation systems, and also researchers that continue to identify insights that maybe are sitting on the shelf and did not find an opportunity to be translated into a real product. So a lot of interesting experts that we can learn from during this hackathon. Now, primarily, this hackathon is for our partner program. So as you probably know, Pine Biotech is working with academic partners around the world, in Africa, in the US, in India. And we develop these relationships with universities because universities are kind of the gatekeepers for students to be introduced to these kinds of topics. And so we would like them to have a clear understanding of how these ideas that they learn about could also be translated further. And so this specific opportunity is for the partner university program, but we are also looking for additional partners. So if you are here today and you are a faculty and you teach students in some way, we would love to talk to you after this webinar to identify a way for us to work together. I think we can bring a lot of value to this kind of bioinformatics training with outcomes, with practical outcomes like this hackathon. And we're also looking for your ideas and your contribution to help shape programs like these as we continue to grow this partnership program. Now, as already mentioned, this is not something that we just recently started. I mean, we have been doing this for several years, and we have over 24,000 participants on our portal across 162 countries, many different universities that we have worked with. And I hope that, through this hackathon and through this partnership program, we would be able to connect as well and continue to grow this industry together. So if anyone would like to speak about that, I welcome you to reach out to me personally, especially if you are in the US, but also the Director of Business Development, Mohit Mazumdar. You can email us on these email addresses. That's probably the best way. But also we welcome, you to connect with us on LinkedIn. Of course, find us on social media, and would love to talk to you more about all of this.